Hi everyone, it's Nigel Pollack here with the lovely Carla van Laar, who is joining us to talk about her journey into becoming a uh, creative and experiential therapist, and ultimately setting up PACFA's, PACFA's College of Creative and Experiential Therapies. Both Carla and I are feeling a little under the weather today, so I hope you'll forgive us that. But I'd really like to make a warm welcome to you, Carla. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Nigel.
We will begin by acknowledging country. I'd like to acknowledge the Gumbaynggirr peoples as the traditional owners of the country upon which I'm sitting. This country is very much a country of mountains and rivers and oceans and islands. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders and ancestors, past and present, and to thank them for their custodianship of these lands over many years.
Yeah, I'm joining from Boonwurrung country. It's also known as Boonwurrung Bunurong country, and the area where I live and work is it's the country of the Yaluk, who are the river people. And that tells you a bit about this place as well. We're surrounded by a lot of waterways, including rivers, creeks, an inlet, and ocean beaches down in the very southeastern part of the continent. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to live here. I feel very held by the elders and the ancestors of this beautiful place, and I also pay my deep respects to them and to all of the first people of the places that people might be viewing from as well.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome thank you for joining us. To anybody, to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person joining us today. Thanks for that, Carla. It is a beautiful part of the world, the world that I've spent a lot of time in and really enjoy. And we can see your beautiful art studio behind you. If anyone's wondering if Carla has got a background, it's not a background. That's her real background, and that's where you currently do your work, Carla. And maybe later on in the interview, you can sort of talk us through a little bit, how you've set it up, why you've set it up the way you've set it up, and that can be part of our conversation today. Our conversation today, Carla, is about you. We're interested in your journey to becoming the therapist that you are today. And I know that you're extremely passionate about what you do and promoting what you do around the country. And so I'm really excited to hear what that journey's been about, where it began, and how you got to be where you are today. So the beginning point, and you did say that when you saw the possible list of topics, you thought, wow, it's big, it's daunting. And it is. It's these are ambitious conversations where I'm really wanting to learn from people like yourself about what the journey to becoming a counsellor is like for different people who are passionate about the space. So, any opening comments from you before we sort of look at where you came from in this world?
Just I really enjoy having these kinds of conversations, and I've had a few here and there. They're different every time, though, about the things that I might focus in on. And that's both the nature of the conversation that evolves between you and I, but also where I am in my journey. So I've actually got behind that that blank board you can see there's a work in progress, and it's called When I Die, I Am Born. And then there's a little caption underneath saying, this is a work in progress, just like me. So whatever I say today is true today, and also acknowledging that I'm evolving just like everything else.
It's a work in progress. Yeah, thanks, Carla. So where did this work in progress begin? What's the early story for you in terms of how your early life led you towards this kind of career?
Mm. Uh, I feel like a lot of us, when we reflect on the things that we turned to in childhood, like our go-to play, that there's often a lot of information in that about, what's our own personal medicine sometimes. And so for me, it was certainly imaginative play, play in nature, art making, and entering into the world of the imagination, and reading a lot. So I did a lot of reading, and when I reflect on those things, I played a lot with my friends, and we did spend a lot of time making up whole story worlds in nature. But I also played a lot, or I did a lot of activities on my own. So those solitary things like reading and art making. Yeah. So they're always my ways of, I think, getting through life. And I'm very fortunate that in my life I've never disconnected from those resources that I had as a child. I've continued art making and being engaged in reading and engaging with other people's stories. So as a young person, I did a fine arts degree through RMIT University, where I majored in painting. So I'd already actually left school early and worked in the fashion industry because I was always interested in using my hands. So, I'm probably what's called an experiential learner in some ways, although I like reading. So, but I guess I always wanted to learn through doing. I didn't really want to spend my days in a school classroom. I preferred to go and make hats or work in a swimwear factory. So I did those things really early, and I returned as a mature age student, even though I was only 18, even back then, when I returned as a mature age student to study fine arts. Following on from that, I started working in communities. So like lots of people, I think, who come to a helping profession, I started off working in the disability field, and also with children and young people in schools and kindergartens, and also in community events, festivals and stuff like that, as a community artist. And if lots of people know this about me, but I became a mother really quite, reasonably young at 21, and I was working during that time as well, but it was through going to the Children's Hospital with my firstborn son, Vaughan, who had a recessive genetic degenerative neurological condition that very little was known about back then. We spent a lot of time going to the Children's Hospital, and that's where I became aware that art therapy was a thing. And we first engaged as participants in art therapy. And for those who know a little bit about me, you'll know that I'm a bereaved mother because Vaughan did have a short life. It was a life-limiting condition. And it was after he passed that I decided to go back and study a bit more and do my master's degree in creative arts therapy, which I began in 1998 and completed in the year 2000. And I've been working as a creative arts working as a creative arts therapist since then. So I guess that it's just saying a little bit about, the biographical details, just the tip of the iceberg, really, that it was my lived experience that brought me to the profession.
You had that experience working with people. You had some experience working with people with disabilities. You had the fine arts background. You always wanted to do things with your hands. I'm interested in that first experience that you had with Vaughan at the Children's Hospital of art therapy, and what, because that was, you're like, oh, this is a thing, and that's often how it is. It's like, oh, this is a thing. I didn't know this was a thing, and often we don't realize that this is a thing until we're adults.
Well, it's a very, I've got a very clear, like, little moment story about that's really personal and very moving, but I will share it since you asked. So there was a flyer in the waiting room. We used to be patients at the outpatients clinic on Ward 8, which was the oncology ward, but Vaughan didn't have cancer. I can't remember why we were at that particular ward, but we were. And there was a flyer on the wall, and there was an art therapy student who was doing a placement there, and she was actually offering to do home visits to families. And so, something else I didn't mention, but you might be able to imagine, because we were young when we had, my ex-husband and I, when we had children, we were young and we were poor. We lived in Brunswick, which is an inner north suburb of Melbourne, which wasn't the gentrified suburb then that it is now, because this is in the early 90s. Anyway, and I thought, wow, okay, free and art sounds good to me. And I also had another little son by then, Henry, who was breastfeeding. So it was, I had my hands full because Vaughan did have really significant disabilities and needed a lot of care. So I was a young, poor mother who was a full-time carer. And I said, yep, okay, we'll be your test family. That sounds good to me. Given this is also before NDIS, just for our younger listeners, there was a time before NDIS. So I called up the number that was on the paper flyer on my landline, because that's how we did it back then too, and managed to organise for this student art therapist to come over. And she did come, and we sat around at our kitchen table, a big, large kitchen table, and there was me. I had Vaughan on my knee because he couldn't sit on his own, and he also couldn't really intentionally use his hands as he would really like to on his own. He needed quite a lot of support to even move his arms and to be stabilised. So he would always sit on my knee. And then we had Henry, my other son, in the high chair, and his dad on the other side of the table, and the art therapist over here. She put out this giant piece of paper spanning the whole table between all of us. And then she got out big, what are they, bottles of paint, acrylic paint. She went, and she squeezed blobs of paint on the paper all over the table. And then she said, and she looked at Vaughan, because she realised that, he was the patient, the hospital patient. She said, Vaughan, we're going to play a game. We're going to play chasey in the paint. I'm going to draw a line with my finger through the paint. You're going to use your hand and draw a line to follow me. And I, being a very, protective mother, was feeling like, oh, doesn't she realize it's really hard for him to use his hands? And I was like going, oh, please don't set him up to fail. Do something that he can actually do. But I was like, okay, well, just, I'm just, that's what I was feeling inside, but not showing. Because then what happened, she put her hand out and started doing the wiggly line, and I placed his hand into the paint. And this is like such an important moment, because this is a small miracle that happened in our family. And so then he actually extended his little finger out and started following her hand and moving his hand around in the paint, right? And following her. And I was like, wow, this really is a miracle. That's how it felt. So from then on, of course, I, just made lots of opportunities for us to do art, and especially tactile sensory art together. And back in those days, also, neuroplasticity and things like biofeedback weren't generally talked about or even well known. It was like in the very, very early days. And so it got me researching about those very things, about, how sensory feedback provides really important opportunities for stimulating neural pathways and assisting people with neurological, difficulties, or degeneration even. So I got interested in that side of thing very, very early on, the sensory aspects of art therapy. Yeah.
What an exciting moment for you.
Very.
And talking about it today, it sounds so pivotal, in terms of how you then brought that into your parenting and care of Vaughan, and I guess treatment as well. That was, parenting is treatment, and then that began to sort of point you in a new direction, still with the art and the creativity, but then towards the use of art and creativity much more actively therapeutically.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, I mean, I've highlighted the sensory nature of that and how it assisted with movement and all of that. But then because we engaged in doing so much, and Vaughan became non-verbal during his life, so the other things that, I became really aware of was the relational quality. So what can happen when we engage in art making together, and how that really deepens and strengthens relationships, and how it gives us opportunities to experience agency and efficacy, which are ultimately very empowering experiences, and how we even the smallest mark becomes an expression of who we are, and that communicates to others and connects us through that shared art experience. So all of these things fascinated me then, still fascinate me now.
So let's go on to the journey then that you went on. Sadly, and this is, I'm just interested, between you and I about the chronology, but Vaughan, you had Henry, and at some point you decided to start studying. You'd been doing your own research at home because you'd had this experience and you really wanted to help Vaughan. And at some point he's passed. He didn't survive. And then you've started studying, like you've gone back and you've started a master's in Melbourne, I'm assuming. Can you talk about like what happened, how that journey sort of fit together?
Yeah. So, like I said, I started studying in 1998. Vaughan passed in 97. So I actually started pretty quickly, and I was one of the younger members in the master's degree. I was 25. Yeah. I think I finished that degree when I was 28. So even as a graduate practitioner, I was really quite young.
And what was the course that you did?
It was a master. It was called the Master of Creative Arts Therapy, and it was at RMIT University. So it was. I maintain it was a really visionary program. It was coordinated by Dr. Jerry Katz, who's, I think she still practices. She came out from Canada, especially to coordinate that course. And what was really innovative and special about it was it's encapsulated in the title, Creative Arts Therapy. And so it was the first master's program in Australia to train multimodal creative arts therapists. So there were art therapy degrees that focused on the use of visual methods in therapy, visual arts methods, but the RMIT's Master of Creative Arts Therapy was an intermodal program, and we got we were very fortunate, in my view, to receive training in a range of modalities that were visual arts, dance movement, drama, and music therapy. And we received training in each of the modalities individually, but then there was a lot of emphasis on the intermodal weaving. So moving between modalities in response to, the needs of the person or the group or the community that we're working with. Yeah.
What a great foundation. What a great foundation to begin this work.
Yeah. There's probably something that people might not know, but which will be of interest, I imagine, especially for PACFA viewers, that it's about 50% of creative arts therapy programs are really similar content to counselling degrees. So, we would have whole entire subjects dedicated to learning counselling theory and skills, and in really similar subjects to a lot of our counselling and psychotherapy counterparts. And as well, then we would have specific subjects around the various arts-based modalities.
A real mix.
Yeah.
And so do you want to talk us through your journey from there in terms of the further training that you did, how you progressed professionally? I know you went back and did a PhD at some stage. So what was that journey like for you?
I think after finishing my master's, I actually when I did, in our master's degree, we did a thesis, so a research project in the third and final year, and we were actually encouraged, again, visionary, we were encouraged to do research, if we wanted to, about our own lived experience. So heuristic studies where the researcher has the lived experience of the particular life experience that they're researching, right? So I did mine about being a bereaved mother and about using the arts to explore that experience, but also to travel through and document the journey of healing or learning to live with being a bereaved mother, right? So I, following that early experience of becoming a bereaved mother, I developed a really strong interest in grief and loss, largely because the resources that I found available in the community, I found to be quite lacking for me. I didn't find them particularly helpful. I was interested in, again, remembering this is in the mid-90s, so it's like nearly 30 years ago. It's 26 or 27 years ago. I found that there was a lot of taboos around grief and bereavement in general, but even more specifically maternal bereavement and the loss of a child was often not talked about at all. There were lots of cultural conventions that distanced, if you like, people, particularly mothers, from being empowered in how things like the care of the deceased person's body, things like how we ritualize grief and loss, how we do ceremonies. So all sorts of things that have come a really long way since then were absent in my experience. So I was really passionate about working in that area. So I did enroll in a further grad dip, which was in grief and loss counselling. after I'd done my master's degree, and then I sort of set about finding work. And because I'd been working in the disabilities field, and then I also had lived experience as a carer, as a mother of a child with a disability, I did continue working in the disability sector, and some of my work was through the local council, which was Darebin back then, and in the council offices, the disability services and the youth justice services sat alongside each other, and clearly they spoke to each other. And I started also getting offered working in the area of youth justice. Both of those two fields I felt that I was quite a good match for, because of my lived experience and my real love for working with people who have disabilities in ways that are very enabling for them, but also because I was a young practitioner myself, that working with young people also felt like a pretty good match. And I was an early school leaver, I was an early home leaver. I don't think I had a traditionally ideal adolescence, and so I could probably relate to young people who were disadvantaged and marginalised. So I found myself working with young people in the youth justice system, and one way or another, that led to me for a number of years working in a program that was specifically, excuse me, for young men who'd been found guilty of sexual offences. And during that time, the program that I worked in had really strong emphasis on drama therapy and adventure wilderness therapy. So I participated in a lot of hands-on learning on the job, going into the bush on week-long camps with young men and doing really quite intensive therapeutic wilderness-based work. I also, during that time, I was already interested in narrative therapy because it emerged during my master's research as what I found during that research was that my story changed. My story about being a bereaved mother changed the more that I engaged with different stories about bereavement from different cultures, not just, the ones that were available to me in my own dominant culture of the Western medical model, but stories about grief and loss and maternal bereavement from across time and across other cultures. So I became really interested in how particular stories and narratives can be more aligned with our own lived experience, and therefore our access to them can become really empowering. So, I was interested in narrative therapy, and I was very fortunate to attend a number of trainings with Michael White over in Adelaide, who, he's no longer with us either anymore. So I've always felt really fortunate that I got to train directly with him. And it was especially around narrative therapy, working with young people and narrative approaches to working with people who perpetrate violence.
Mm-hmm. Incredible opportunities, wonderful experience, and exposure to Michael, who founded narrative therapy and really was effective in being a proponent and making it something that's known throughout the world, and still something that's well represented in South Australia and Adelaide, and a real opportunity for you to sort of develop and deepen along that pathway. I can hear how stories and the art and the creativity can intertwine to heal and connect.
And it was, I think, Nigel, I think it was, no, I don't know, it was maybe it was 10 years after finishing my master's that I decided I was ready. It might have been 7 years, I can't remember, something like that. I was ready to go and once again immerse in another journey of intense study, and I enrolled to do my professional doctorate in therapeutic arts practice, and that was at the MyCat Institute, which was the Melbourne Institute of Creative and Experiential Therapies. Yeah.
Is that still around?
That is still around, and that so the course at RMIT folded, but MyCat set up at just after that RMIT course was founded, and if I started in 1998, it must have been the first year of intake must have been 1996. So I think MyCat started up like that year or the year after, and they also emphasize an intermodal, expressive and experiential creative approach. So that's the other training institution that's still around in Australia for people who are really interested in the intermodal approach.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that research and then how that added to your knowledge and understanding and where that then led you going forwards?
Okay. I meant to have the book here that was published out of it, but I've left it inside. So I wanted to, as I mentioned, in my master's research, I researched an aspect of my own lived experience. And in my doctoral research, I wanted to be present in the research because that's also part of, I guess, my philosophy of practice, that I am embedded in my life and in my life as a practitioner, and that research that acknowledges the subjectivity and the intersubjectivity of the researcher and the research and the maybe research participants is much more aligned and in keeping with my philosophy of practice. So, but I wanted to expand it out and also do research that was collaborative with others. So I decided to choose an approach that was arts-based and collaborative research. And I wanted to research about sharing women's stories through art. Right? My developing interest, that I'd been working more and more with women. I'd actually, for about 6 years, I was part of a project that travelled backwards and forwards to Nepal, and we worked with women who were part of non-government organisations that were all working against the problem of sex trafficking. And so a lot of the women who worked there were sex trafficking survivors and women who, Nepalese women who'd made it their life mission to dedicate their life work to, women's rights and journeys. And in those early days of going backwards and forwards to Nepal, there was most of the women that we worked with didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Nepali. So we'd work through a translator, but we worked through art all the time, right? So that's what we were providing training about, was about using arts-based approaches for psychosocial counselling and therapy for the women who were survivors. And I was just so struck every single time about the quality of the connections and what we're able to communicate and share, and the bonds that formed between us that transcended the barrier of language difference. That's just one of the reasons. I was also yeah, just, really interested in sharing women's stories as an artist because of the underrepresentation of women in the the published histories, Western histories of art and artists. So the fact that women haven't had as many opportunities for our stories to be seen through the acknowledgement and publishing of our artworks. So I wanted to do something that had a social justice angle to it in creating more opportunities for women's stories to be seen. So I called my project Seeing Her Stories. I worked with a group of women who I recruited in an arts-based way because I painted some paintings. They were autobiographical in nature. They were artworks about, experiences from my life, scenes that I'd encountered, or inner images that emerged from my inner world. And I exhibited them, and people came to the exhibition, and people, if you've ever been to an exhibition, you might recall sometimes an artwork kind of grabs you. It leaps out at you. Yeah, it does something to you. It moves you, sometimes physically and often emotionally. You return to it. You might even still be able to see it in your mind's eye today. Yeah. These are the kind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Mm.
So those are the kinds of experiences that I wanted to unpack and understand. So the people who became my research participants were women who'd had that kind of response to an image of mine. I really wanted to understand, what is the artwork doing here between us? How, what is happening? So that was what my research was about.
Oh,
Mm,
okay. Really interesting and really tuning in. And it sounds like a continuation. Like it really feels like a continuation of work that you were doing professionally and then into the professional doctorate, and a real deepening and opportunity to focus, really focusing in on that point of connection.
yeah.
What is it? You've put something of yourself onto a canvas, and something in what's on the canvas connects to something in somebody else, and you were deeply interested in that. And so I'm then interested in
Mm,
what did that uncover for you, and where did that then lead? Where did how did that change the arc of your professional trajectory? Because I think that,
mm,
particularly within the counselling and even the creative therapy space, um, there's curiosity around, okay, what does that additional bit of in-depth research study, that's then published, as you said, you've published it, then it became a book, so you become a published author. How does that then influence your career, from there, your development as a practitioner?
mm. Yeah, it's really profoundly, honestly. So I've said to a couple of people um, who are my friends and colleagues and peers, who've decided to undertake their own doctoral research. What I realised um, through the process was that it's not just about me doing the research. Actually, the research was making me who I am. So there's that reciprocal relationship with the research. So it has had a really profound influence, or not just influence. It's shaped me. I spent 10 years doing my doctorate part-time. It's a 5-year full-time degree. Took me 10 years doing it. I was engaged with it the whole time for a decade of my life. It interested me so deeply. So, it's a very significant relationship I have with that period of my life, right? And I really wanted to deepen my understandings. You know, I wanted to find out things I didn't know. I wasn't looking to prove a hypothesis or utilize you know, a particular research approach. I wanted to find out things that I didn't know, and in fact develop new knowledge and new understandings that didn't exist yet. So really birthing something new. And in kind of the nutshell summary, the kinds of things that I found were that when we share our stories through art, it brings us into the present moment, and we become more aware of our embodiment, right? So we feel more connected to our embodied experiencing. That the context that we share our stories through art in makes a really big difference to how we experience the sharing of stories through art, and that can make experiences both either risky and also more safe, and that often risky things become safe in the right kind of context when we share stories through art. I'm just trying to think what came after that one. Presence and embodiment, context, risk and safety. The final chapter that was really important, not the final one, the second final one, was that when we share our stories through art, that our relationships strengthen and deepen, and we form really real interpersonal connections through which we co-create each other and co-create the world, right? That's, to me, that's like one of the most essential roles that art does play in the world, that it connects us sometimes to parts of ourselves that might have been disconnected, lost or missing or fractured or stolen. We can reconnect to aspects of ourselves that can help us to feel more whole, that it helps us connect to each other, even across space and time. This is amazing. This is one of the most significant things that art does. It proves that we exist, right? It proves our humanity, yeah, in a way that can go beyond space and time, and that's deeply connecting, you know, to each other, you know, not just between individuals like you and me, but it might be to people who lived tens of thousands of years ago, and also people who might live tens of thousands of years into the future, right? So connecting to our common humanity and some of the you know, inevitable aspects of human experience, helping us to feel less alone, less isolated in our humanity. Right? That to me is a core thing that art does. And the co-creation aspect is hugely important as well, because essentially it's a very hopeful perspective, in that if we deeply sit with that idea that we are co-creating each other, ourselves, you know, within our own context, in the world, in the universe, it's a really, it's kind of a philosophy of radical interconnectedness, right? But in which we are active, and it means that what we do does matter. Yeah, my actions affect you, my actions affect our communities, my actions affect our society, they affect the planet, they affect the ecology, right? We all affect each other, and it brings so much meaning and purpose to our actions in life. So they're the kinds of things that I learned.
A really deep connection to to art, the creation of art, the contexts within which art is created, and that central theme of connection, and humanness and beingness, and in being embodied as human beings and connecting to other embodied human beings, possibly 10,000s or tens of thousands of years in the past, and possibly tens of thousands of years in the future, and being part of that bridge building across that time and space. So I do have queries around what you've sort of touched upon, your philosophy of practice, and I think that I think what you were saying just now, I guess that's building that philosophy of practice. I'm aware of the space behind you that I can see, we can see, and I'm interested because that's a context, right? That's a context in which you help people to connect with their present, past, future selves, but also through their connection to self and their embodiment of self, also to others outside of the time and the space and the context in which they're in, and also to different parts of themselves that they might have lost and be reclaiming. So I'm interested in your space. I'm interested in the specific kinds of skills you use where different therapeutic psychotherapeutic modalities might weave in and out of the art therapy, the creative therapy process, and who throughout history and time are you drawing on? You talked about Michael White. You talked about the incredible woman that set up the college at RMIT where you studied and did your masters. So there's a range of sort of topics that I'm interested in hearing you possibly interweave as you sort of share what it is that you do and where the influences for what you actually do in real time have come from.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, welcome to my studio.
Great to be there.
Yeah, like it's not a background. Here I am. I can move in it, right? The front door is there. It's in
feel free to show us around. Talk us through it, because you've spent so many decades thinking about context and creation and connection. I'm assuming that has gone into what you've created in what we're seeing.
Yes, it has. So this is a home-based studio. It's about 6 meters by 6 meters square. It's big enough to work with 1 or 2, or at a pinch up to 4 people in here. If I want to work with a larger group, which I often do, I need to hire a bigger space. I also do quite a bit of work online, but I like having the studio in the background because in some ways it sets the stage, right? That people are invited into my creative space. So number one, there's quite a bit of self-disclosure in that, right? That people can actually see the context that I'm really in. And you'll see that I've got some of my own artwork on the wall, as well as some artwork by a friend of mine who's a local traditional owner. And I've got a bit of mess around. I've got some frames here ready for artworks that haven't been framed yet. I've got a couch and a little coffee table, which is just from the op shop, and another chair. And then over here, I've got, a table that's got a lot of art paraphernalia on it. And at the moment, it's also got a sewing machine on it, because I've got one person I'm working with who likes working with soft sculpture. Along the far wall, there's art supplies, and they've got labels. And there's also, out of view, another shelf here with a whole heap more art supplies. We've got a concrete floor that, isn't particularly clean, but it's also not particularly precious. And just over to that side, I've got a bookcase with lots of art therapy and other therapeutic kind of books and resources on it. So that's kind of the setting. It's also timberlight, which people seem to like because it's got the feeling of being encased in a soft material, and it's a warm color. Right, we've got windows with a view to outside, and I'm so fortunate that out these windows we can see trees, which are, deeply healing living creatures in my, worldview, that keep us company. And there's lots of bird life. So we've got all those things. That's the kind of context it is. So as you can gather, it's a really, I like to think of it as a really non-clinical space, and working in a space that is very clearly an art studio is important to me, where people walk in and can see that the expectation here is that we make things, we do things, and we can make a mess. And, you know, it's quite common for me to run a session in here and not sit down, Nigel, once. And I also really like that. Yeah. On the other hand, when people do first walk in, I will offer them the opportunity. I'll say, would you like to sit on the couch and have a chat first, or do you want to go straight to the art table? Right. So from the very moment people walk in the door, there's options, and, you know, that's part of how I work. I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of creative and experiential therapists work, is with offering choices, plenty of choices along the way. So it might first of all be, do you want to sit at the couch? Do you want to sit at the table? Then there might be, would you like to talk a bit first, or would you like to get straight into making something? And then it might be, so I've got some suggestions for processes that we could engage in if you feel like you want to be held in that way with some ideas. Or if you've got an idea of your own, then, you know, we can also do that. If you've come in with something, you know, then they'll be like, okay, so I can show you the materials that we've got available. All right. So I wouldn't, personally, I don't take a prescriptive approach when it comes to materials. Take a more phenomenological approach. As you know, you asked for people that are inspired or inspirational. So the art therapist Marla Bertensky is known for being one of the early phenomenological art therapists, and she would talk about the phenomenology of materials and about putting, you know, offering a choice and a range so that people can choose what they're drawn to themselves. There's also people who are influential, you know, people who are my colleagues in the literature, right, who have worked in and promoted the art therapy studio approach, or the studio art therapy approach. And they're people like, you know, famous authors in the field of creative arts therapy like Sean McNiff and Pat Allen, Bruce Moon and Catherine Highland Moon would probably be four of the ones that have whose work I engaged with. And I, some years ago in the 2000s somewhere, I took myself on a self-funded art therapy studio tour, and I went to Chicago, which is, yeah, people may have heard of the open studio approach. So that was actually, the Open Studio Project was founded by Pat Allen in Chicago, and it was set up as a way, she was really interested in person-centered practice when it comes to art therapy, and she developed the Open Studio approach as a way to try and create the core conditions of non-judgment, empathy, and unconditional positive regard in a studio context, right? And with, on the premise that if we can create these kinds of conditions in a studio, then people, and if people are provided with opportunity to make art, select materials, then their innate healing drive towards wholeness will be enabled to guide them in their art making practice. So I went and visited her studio. I also visited the studio that Catherine Highland Moon had set up, and that was similar but different to Pat Allen's studio, in that it was an open studio, but it was also open group. so people could come in and out. Like they would just be open, and people could come in and out and access the space. So no session had a beginning, a middle, and an end, like it did at Pat Allen's studio. It was a closed group where everyone did the process work together. Catherine Harlan Moon's studio was even more open in that it was a safe space for people who are members of the community to come in and out, and it was linked with a local service, which was a drug and alcohol service. So it was set up to, create a space where people from that service and members of the community could come in and out together in a safe way. So I visited a couple of other studios as well, and I drew on bits of all of those in the studios that I've set up myself to practice in. And, you know, I can totally imagine with enough resources and even more exquisite, more amazing, more purpose-built space than this as well, Nigel.
So there's a dream, or it sounds like that's there, that's already there of the possibilities that you can conceive of going forwards. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your space, and thank you for sharing some of that journey to Chicago and the work of Pat Allen and Catherine Harlan Moon in particular, as well as Bruce Moon and Sean McKiff. That's lovely to hear. I'm wondering if there's anything else you wanted to add in terms of, you've talked about person-centered narrative, phenomenological, and the creative, the multimodal creative therapies. I'm wondering if there's anything you wanted to add to that to give it a sense of round, if there's any rounding out that you wanted to do before we then talk about kind of where you are right now in your practice and in your work, and who you're working with and how you're doing that.
Yeah, so just in terms of how I kind of position myself, maybe as a therapist, all of the things that you've added in. So a really core commitment to arts-based practice and creative process work, which is inherently a very experiential way of working, where I have a deep, abiding, profound trust in the creative process as innately healing. Right. So, alongside, as you said, narrative approaches, person-centered practice, and I would add to that trauma-informed and strengths-based approaches. So when I'm describing how I work, they're the kinds of ways that, that sit well with me. And yeah.
And who have you found yourself working with? Predominantly, is there a particular client group? Are there particular people that are either drawn to or that you are seeking to support? You talked historically, it was bereaved mothers that similar to yourself, and it was also young people who were disadvantaged or disabled. Yeah, where are you finding yourself making the contribution?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, now that I live in a small town, Nigel, because I lived in Brunswick for 25 years, which is a densely populated inner urban village. Now I live in a sparsely populated rural village with only 6,000 people, and I am quite a generalist now. So I don't have a specific one kind of client base. I've found myself working with women and children who are affected by family violence. I've also found myself working with our local veteran community, so many people experiencing PTSD and depression. I've also found myself working with NDIS participants who may have intellectual disabilities or some physical disabilities. And there's still autistic people are still NDIS participants, so they're people who also access art therapy services and really enjoy them here in the studio. I've worked recently with carers for, in providing wellbeing sessions for groups. And I may have forgotten something, but the picture I'm trying to paint is that living here in the country, I get the opportunity to work with quite a range of people, which also means I need to be pretty adaptable. Yeah.
Thank you. And it does represent a bit of a shift in your practice. There's a couple more questions. So you provide supervision in the space as well. You haven't mentioned the provision of supervision. So maybe touching on so the two things I'm interested in is one of the challenges I have as I become more senior in the field is, where do I get quality professional development? How do I continue to learn and grow as a practitioner? I've had to become quite creative around that, and I imagine that's similar for yourself as well. And also supervision. Supervision's it's a big theme in our field. Every counsellor has to be supervised, minimum number of hours per year. And so, what does that look like in the creative space? And where do you get your own professional development?
Yeah, sure. So I am a PACFA accredited supervisor myself, so I provide supervision, which I feel like that's an important part of my role, as an established practitioner in the field. And I do that online and also in person here, and I also do small groups online. I'm really fortunate to have a great supervisor of my own, who's an art therapist who's been practicing pretty much around the same amount of time as me, who I share similar values with, who I feel really confident that she can meet me at the stage I'm at in my professional development. And I also attend small group supervisions when sometimes a little series of them comes up, and I'll engage in those. And I also have a peer supervisor who's another person who's actually in a different field. She's not a creative arts therapist, so we have peer supervision together as well. So I like to have that kind of a blend in my supervision. And when it comes to professional development, I am one of those people who always does way more than is mandated for registration purposes, and I still can't ever feel like I'm doing everything I want to do. So I attend the PACFA conferences, of course, as well as other conferences like the Rural Mental Health Conference, the Australian Childhood Foundation Conference, some of the international art therapy online events and conferences. And I also organise the Creative Mental Health Forum, which is an immersive 4-day professional development event down here in Boon Wurrung Country in Inverloch, Victoria. That's really focused on creative and experiential approaches in mental health and wellbeing. And it's also a collective care retreat for practitioners in our community to come together, be held in nature, nurture ourselves, nurture each other, and engage in workshops that are, facilitated by people who are leaders and established in the field, including international people, and also emerging practitioners and people kind of working on the edges of established practice. So the event next year, there'll be a number of people who are like, what's happening more and more in our field is that people might be training in and then combining approaches like art therapy and nature-based therapy, or they might be including creative arts therapy with equine therapy. Yep. And so, yeah, they might be even combining somatic approaches with some expressive arts, right? So that happens more and more often, and those kinds of, sharing those kinds of innovations in creative and experiential therapies is part of what we do at the Creative Mental Health Forum as well.
Thank you. Oh, that sounds very rich and exciting, and I love hearing that. Yeah, I can feel the excitement of what sort of emerges on the edges as people start to think about how different things that previously haven't been brought together are brought together, and so often, new things are made when two existing things are brought together in a new way. I think that's really exciting. So thanks for sharing all of that. My final questions, and I will double barrel them again. Firstly, around whether there's anything else that you'd like to say as part of this conversation to round out the conversation for you. And then the second part of that for me is to invite you to talk to kind of your vision for the future of creative and experiential therapies in Australia, and what it is that you're hoping to achieve through the more practical, strategic, political aspects of your work in developing. You've developed the College of Creative Experiential Therapies with PACFA, and you're aspirational in that space. So, what would you like to share, both in terms of rounding out the conversation and where you would like to see all this hard work going?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nigel. So my practice at the moment is I'm an independent practitioner. So it's a time in my life where I'm, thrilled to be completely self-employed, and I managed to create enough work to give myself a job, right? That's all. I don't employ people or anything like that, but I give myself a job, and within my own job description that I've managed to create for myself, there is what I like to think of as an ecology of practice. And it's this ecology of practice that I feel helps keep me well, so that I can continue practicing. And so there are the therapeutic services like individual and group therapy, and also supervision, contributing to the development of other practitioners. There's organising professional development events, and there's also social action. And so for me, that's, part of the balance of what keeps me.
It sounds like a palette.
Does sound like a palette. That's the palette of my practice. So my work at PACFA is part of what I see as the social action element. And like you, Nigel, I'm a volunteer in my role at the College of Creative and Experiential Therapies. It's important to me to be part of the change that I want to see in the world. And, that change that I want to see is a home, a professional home for creative and experiential therapists within, an organisation where I feel aligned with the values and supported by the entire community. And that within that structure, that it is, when we work within that structure, we can work for the greater good, for something that's bigger than ourselves, right? So we can be part of it. Our individual actions make a difference, but when we gather together for common intention, then we can really effect more social change. And so some of the social changes that I want to see are things that help us as a whole community move more towards healing and then well-being. So I believe we've got a long way to go for healing in this country. I want to be part of that. And I firmly believe that there's, the historical injustices of colonisation and settlement are, a deep and ongoing wound that until we move forward healing, truth-telling and healing the injustices that our contemporary society is sort of still founded on, that we won't really be a country who's able to be well and healthy. So I believe those things are really closely linked, right? And so part of the healing that we need to have comes through embracing ways of not just promoting health and well-being, but also healing. Okay. And to me, the arts are an amazing way of doing that, both for individuals, families, groups, communities, and, our whole society. So my mission, if you like, that's probably not a great word to use always, but something that gives me a really deep sense of purpose is creating more access, more awareness and access and uptake, more opportunity for people to engage in creative and experiential ways of actually doing healing and being well together in a connected way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that vision, and made me think about healing, connecting, and the social action work. We volunteer, we give up a lot of our time to pursue what we see as meaningful, as purposeful, and it's not really for us, and it may not be something that we see, but it's something that we hope that by putting in the effort and putting in the time and making the contribution and doing it in a way that is focused and targeted and intentional, it will yield those benefits of potential healing and connection in the future for a better world in the future, and definitely share that vision, mission, dream with you. So on that note, Carla and Laar, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to further conversations and to this conversation that we've had today being available for other people to access and take what they would like. Just like a piece of art, they will take whatever connects with them and whatever they would like from our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to talk with you, Nigel.
Been fantastic.